Good day, everyone. Welcome to my podcast. Here I have a distinguished personality, my professor, Professor Scott Schraufnagel. He is well known for his academic research on United States Congress and election. He is like a father figure in the department. He has held many positions, but because of time, I would like to go straight into this podcast. But before then, welcome to my show, sir.
Happy to be here. Yeah, wonderful. Thanks.
First, I would like to ask or know, because I know most person would also know, did you always wanted to be a political scientist?
Believe it or not, I did. I mean, I started off thinking I wanted to be a political scientist as a really young boy, probably before I really knew what that meant. But I wanted to be a professor. I was interested in politics from a very young age. And at some points, I was maybe like in high school or something. So wanting to be a political scientist goes pre-high school. And so then I was thinking, well, politician, lawyer, go to law school and so forth. And ultimately, I didn't do any of those for my 20s. I was in business, but always in the back of my mind, I wanted to be a professor. And eventually, took the initiative to make that happen. Of course, going to college and requires. At one point, I had a master's degree, and with that, I started teaching at community college. But I knew if I was going to become a professor, a tenured professor, and do research, that I was going to need a PhD. And so I already was married and had 2 little kids. And I remember telling my wife, "We're going back into poverty because to get a PhD."
Oh, wow, it's interesting story. But is there any particular thing that shaped your interest into becoming a political scientist at a very young age?
Well, maybe, my uncle, my dad's younger brother and him, I remember hearing them talk politics, and they disagreed with each other. My dad was for Nixon and my uncle was for Kennedy, and so that sort of shaped me, just sort of as a real young boy listening to those conversations, and I didn't know who. And then I had grandparents on one side that were conservative, grandparents on the other side that were very progressive, and so I had this tension. It kind of got me hooked, I guess.
Okay, you are well known and recognized for your work in United States Congress. Mm-hmm. And as well voting. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us what initially drew you into this particular research area?
Okay, so when I went into that PhD program, I was thinking I was going to be an Africanist. As you know, I spent some time in the Peace Corps in West Africa in Sierra Leone, and so I thought I wanted to study African politics. Well, at that time, it was quite a few years ago. My professor told me, "Well, there's no jobs for Africanists," and so that's what caused me to change my focus to American government. Of course, that's not true today. Today, Africanists, people who study Africa and make a career of that, is a very, very fast-growing, I think, subfield within political science, but not back 30 years ago, and and then as far as elections, I always knew we had poor voter turnout. I always knew that we somehow excluded third parties, because I had like 2 parts of my family, one Democrat, one Republican, so I wanted something in the middle or something, but I knew there was no real chance for third parties or minor parties in the U.S. And so that was one of my initial sort of research areas. And then, because of my international focus, I was always interested in elections around the world and how U.S. elections could be improved.
Wow, interesting. You are actually working on something about cost of voting.
Right.
And a layman may not understand what you mean by cost of voting, because here in the United States, it is widely agreed that U.S. is a democratic country, and they may likely not understand what this cost of voting is if you don't operationalize it to the audience. What do you mean by cost of voting?
Yeah, so we developed a cost of voting index with me and a couple of my former students, and costofvotingindex.com, and you can learn more about it. The time and the hassle, the amount of work it takes to vote. You might think, well, how is that? But it varies quite a bit across the 50 American states and around the world. There is, when a government goes out of its way to register use, we call it automatic registration, and so that you really only vote once because you're automatically registered. You just have to show up. Well, in the U.S., voting is a two-stage process, right? You have to get registered to vote, and then some states with certain timelines and time limits, or in terms of when you're eligible to register to vote. And then just something as simple as some states have the polling hours open longer than others. Some states allow for early voting, other states don't. And so there's great variation across the 50 states in how easy they make it to vote or how costly it is in terms of your time and energy.
Okay, now going about the variations among the states based on the cost of voting, which state do you think is more costlier for citizens to vote here in the United States, and which is lesser?
Yeah, so this is pretty well established, and it's been peer reviewed, and it's we know Oregon and Washington State make it the easiest to vote among the 50 states. So the cost of voting is the lowest. Mississippi, New Hampshire, Texas are among the states that make it the most difficult to vote.
Okay. Talking about your career, is there any decision you have made that now when you look back, you think you could have done it differently?
I don't really have any regrets. I've made mistakes, of course, but we learn from our mistakes, right? And so I don't really wish for anything different than what's happened. I'm very, very satisfied with where my life is at right now, and I think I'm stronger because of making those mistakes. So I'm not.
Do you mind sharing any of those mistakes that have shaped you?
Well, so like as it relates to a purely academic career, I think it's important to to be focused in your research area, right? If you want to, if you spread yourself too thin, right, in terms of your research interests and so forth, and then I, as you noted in your introduction, I've done jobs in administration. I was a department chair, and I was even associate dean for a time, and a short time. But those jobs were not really what I was interested in, and they're not, and so they sidetracked me and prevented me from doing what I truly love, which is research and working with students.
Okay. You're one of your biggest strengths, I don't know, but observing you is research and methodology. And every political science student and even the best of political scientists strive to do better in this area. But you have had opportunity to teach many graduate students. What do you think is actually holding back some of these graduate students from doing better in research and methodology?
Yeah, I think well, there's an initial hurdle that everyone has to overcome, and that is you have to learn to think like a scientist. That you have to learn to think in terms of cause and effect, and think in terms of hypotheses and how to operationalize those hypotheses. But beyond that, like once you cross that barrier, then methods can become pretty sophisticated pretty quick. But one of the things I see holding some students back is that they're afraid of learning new methods. They're imagining that it's beyond them, that they're not going to be able to figure it out, and that's just not the case. Sometimes we see statistical equations, and they have a lot of Greek letters in them, and so forth, and students roll their eyes and imagine that, oh my goodness, but those Greek letters, they're just symbols, and there's certain sort of assumptions that are associated with statistics. And once you understand those basic assumptions, that's all you really need. And then, you can Google how to run a particular type of regression or whatever, depending on the, the kind of data that you have and so forth. So yeah, I would just encourage students to not be afraid and to, don't sell yourself short, that, you're capable of doing a lot more than you imagine, I think.
We have written books. We are quite well published in so many top journals. What do you think is the secret of actually publishing a very good research work?
Well, thick skin. You have to. You know what I mean? You have to be able to withstand rejection, and then keep working, and then live long. And you know, I think there is this sort of knack that to writing and so forth that takes a while to be able to figure out where, writing really, and it's sort of technical writing, right? A lot of it is fairly scientific writing, and so, but you still have to tell a story. You still have to. I was just at a conference this weekend, and reviewed papers for.
I saw you while I was coming back when you were alighting from the train.
Oh yeah.
I saw you from the window.
And the deal there was that I was a couple of young scholars, and they had wonderful skills and wonderful methodology and wonderful data, but they weren't telling a story like that would resonate, and that people would be interested in knowing. And so there's a little bit of storytelling that is something I had to pick up along the way, that I think is what allows for a successful publishing career and so forth.
So are you trying to say that a good scientist must be a very good storyteller?
At least a good political scientist has to, and probably any scientist. I mean, if you can't explain what you found, if you can't bring your data to life, and make it resonate with just anyone, so that you're probably, journal editors and stuff are very keen to make sure that the data speaks to a general audience. The findings speak to a general audience, and you have to be able to tell that story. I think, even the chemists probably have to do that, right? Yes. Everyone has to be able to make, the public. You have to be able to make sense of what you found.
You are one of the key advocates of co-authoring with your students. And in doing so, you encourage your student to be the first author. Mm-hmm. Can you explain your reasoning for this? Because I know this is not actually common.
Yeah, so I co-author with students just because I love people, and I love students, and I want to see people successful. And I know that, and then, putting their name first, it's just a courtesy. I try to live my life in service to others, right? Mm-hmm. By having that attitude, it just makes sense to put a student's name first and to co-author with students. It has cost me a little bit in terms of because students have some very, very wide-ranging ideas, and so if you look at my CV or resume, right, mm-hmm. you'll see that I've published in a lot of different areas, and part of that is just because that's the direction that I let some students take me.
Okay, thank you very much. In publishing academic work, although you have said something scarcely about it, scholars often face rejection. Mm-hmm. And sometimes because of this rejection, they get disappointed. Right. Some of them get discouraged. Yeah. And there is this story that you always tell us about your colleague who was so offended about rejection, and he wrote pages of reasons why his work is good fit.
Right.
And that led to his death.
Yeah.
Now that you are now a professor, a full-blown professor, what advice do you have for those coming along who are actually facing same rejection? And are you also immune from this rejection?
Yeah, I'm not immune. It still smarts a little bit, but not very much anymore. It doesn't, because for me to get upset, that's a personal decision I make, right? I have to allow myself to get upset. People say, well, she made me mad or he made me mad. Well, technically, nobody can make me mad, right? That's a decision I have to make myself. And so, when I get a rejection, and I still get them, I have to, I think about it for a minute, but then I just realize, how important is this? How big a deal is this? And I started try to put it in perspective, and then I just make the decision to not let it bother me.
So same thing that you are actually doing, do you think is generalizable? Do you think your the younger ones coming after you should also apply same strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. I think everyone can. I mean, it's really about just controlling what it is we think about. Being mindful. I try to spend, like walking here today. I make use of like a Buddhist technique where I will beat my chest slowly as I walk or whatever, and I try to keep track of my steps and be mindful walking. We call it mindful breathing and so forth. And that's a way to practice what it is I'm thinking about. And because when I'm doing that, I'm not thinking about anything other than what I'm walking and breathing, right? And it's a form of meditation. Meditation is like playing the piano. It takes practice, and the more you practice meditation, the better you get at it, and the better you're able to control what it is you think about. And it's an essential skill. You see maybe a homeless person or something. Maybe in the U.S. we have a lot of homeless, and they're muttering words to themselves, and people, oh my goodness, that. But there's everybody, is doing the same thing. They may be saying it in their head instead of out loud. But people are crazy if they until they learn how to pay attention to what they're to meditate, to learn to stay in the present moment, right? It's only in the present moment where I can effectuate, peace, and joy. Right? If all of my problems have always been, me focused on the past, worrying about something that happened in the past or projecting into the future. Right? If I can stay in the moment, there's great peace there. And that's what I try to do. And it's a skill that anyone and everyone ought to try to develop.
I agree. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
This is deep. You have told us your story about how you become a tenure track professor, how you went through the process. Even though how you said it seems like it was quite easy, it wasn't really easy. And we have sat on, like you have examined many younger colleagues whom your recommendation made them become an associate professor. So what advice do you have for those who are actually in this phase of pursuing a tenure track, this tenure track process?
Yeah, so one is to sort of check the ego at the door and allow to learn and grow from your mistakes and so forth. But I mean, just real practically, you need friends to become tenured. You need outside letters, right? It's not even friends, because your best friends cannot write letters for you in the tenure process, the way it works. But you have to have developed associations with people where people assume something about you positively. You can use their names then as you suggest names for tenure. The tenure process requires writing. Here we call it a part one, a summary of what you've been up to and where you're going with your research and so forth. And that narrative is crucial, especially the leading with a strong story about, what you're doing and so forth. And there's a skill, again, to staying focused. It's not unlike like a younger, somebody that's just applying to a PhD program. I think one of the mistakes that some people make is they don't pay enough attention to the personal statement, because most all applications require that. In the tenure process, your part one, or again, it's like a personal statement. And sometimes a kind of a mistake that I see people make is they make their personal statement a little too personal. It really needs to be professional. And it needs to be about your professional goals, the difference you're intending to make, and how you want to make the world a better place, and how you can do that with your research interests and so forth. So wherever you are in the stage of being promoted, just getting accepted into a PhD, and then of course getting a tenure track job, and then or any job, and then getting promoted within that job. At each stage of the way, you're going to have to be able to sell yourself. Sometimes people will sort of exaggerate their record a little bit. That's a problem. And that's a mistake, I would say. But on the other hand, you also have to sell yourself, right? So there is a little bit of a balancing act there where, no one's going to promote you without you. You got to put yourself out there and say, I'm going to do this. But then you don't exaggerate, or don't become a braggadocious, or, don't go too far with it. I guess that's the key there. But I would take, anytime someone's requiring you a narrative of you, like, if you're applying for a PhD program or you're applying for tenure, you want to take that narrative very, very seriously and proofread it a lot, and have other people read it for you and so forth.
Okay. One of the things I took out from your discussion is building association, to use a strategy of actually in the tenure track, for those in the tenure track process. Yeah. So how do one actually build a very good network?
Yeah, to build a network, it really just requires those uncomfortable initial interactions where you have to just go and introduce yourself to people and know something about who it is you're introducing yourself to. So when I was a younger scholar, I would lay out a game plan for a conference that I was going to go to. I'm going to go to this panel and this panel, and I'm going to try to introduce myself to these people. And then, of course, do my homework so I know something about them, so that when I go to introduce myself, I can, relate to them regarding their interests and so forth. Yeah, it's tough work, to take that leap of faith or whatever it is, to be able to just put yourself out there and meet somebody. But it's absolutely essential and crucial. That's one of the advantages of getting old, is that my network's big enough now. I don't really, I'm not anxious in trying to grow it anymore. But I do want to maintain the network I have, and I want to maintain my usefulness to others. Another thing about establishing a network, right? If you're willing to do something for someone, right? Like, when you came and asked me to do this podcast, before you ever asked the question, I said the answer is yes.
Yes.
Right. And I had no idea what you were going to ask me.
Yes.
Right. But the answer was going to be yes. And so, if we maintain that kind of attitude, right, where we're trying to help, right, we're trying to be of service to others, and I'll tell a quick story. My mom and dad died a few years back, and and then my brother was living in the house that we grew up in. He passed away, and so we were going to sell the house that all of us kids grew up in, and it was a big undertaking, because the house hadn't been. It was like a hoarder. I don't know if it hadn't been cleaned, and it was just really a mess. And so I called on friends that I knew in high school, and friends and they all came and helped. And my brothers and sisters were like, "How do you ask these people to help us? How can you do that? How do you?" And I didn't know how to answer that. And then I thought about it, and it's, well, they sense that about me. They know I'm willing, and I'm not just saying it, I'm willing to do anything I can for them. If you have that attitude, right, that you're willing to help others, it's easier to ask for help.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know, someday I might need you for something, right? and so I want to make sure I said yes to you, so that, and it's not like I would say yes to you, and I would say yes to anyone, not because I'm hoping to get back. I honestly believe I just want to be of service. But it turns out you kind of can't out generous, because as soon as you put yourself out there as someone who's willing to help others, it comes back to you, and it all comes back. I'm not a particularly religious guy, but I study religion, and I study all the religions of the world, and I'm a big fan of all of them, and I love them all. And I love to look for the similarities. I use the term God. I don't know what that means to some of your listeners or whatever, but my experience is you can't out-generous God, right? That if you give of yourself, right, that it will come back to you. And in the Eastern religions, they call it karma, right? And in Christian traditions, they say you reap what you sow, right? And I think they're both right.
This is so deep and inspiring. You have sat on different admission panels, especially that has to do with recruiting international students into the graduate program. What do you look out for in a strong application?
Yeah. So there's two things really that the students want to try to make sure they cover, right? Two bases, I would say. One is that make sure you've written your personal statement carefully, that it speak to your professional interests and your professional goals and your research interests and so forth. And then secondly, make sure that your research interests match up with the faculty where you're applying. Right? Because there's people who have, strong applications and strong backgrounds and so forth. But if there's no faculty at the university they're applying to that studies that, there's no one to mentor them. So they might get a rejection, and it's got nothing to do with their resume or their personal statement or anything. It's just that there's no fit. So when you apply for PhD programs, make sure you find a good fit, for your interests, and you say, well, I could fit in anywhere. Well, that goes back to the personal statement. You need to have some objective and some goals and some priorities and so forth, and then share those in the cover letter, the personal statement, and then make sure there's a good match for you at the university you're applying to.
No, thank you very much. Can you just give me a statistic of number of PhD dissertation you have supervised? Successfully?
So I think I've been the chair or a member of the committee of maybe 25 or something successful PhD master's degree students or something like that. Yeah, that sounds about right. It could be a little bit bigger number than that. Because right now on my CV, I don't include any of the stuff from my previous job. And so there were some folks then as well. So,
okay, now I know based on your experience with the graduate school, you have been able to see some strong, not so strong students. But what do you think distinguish this students, and what is the secret behind some finishing early and strong, despite this rigorous, overwhelming, and highly demanding graduate studies program?
Their mental health.
Mental health.
Yeah. If they can maintain their good mental health and maintain their peace, if you will, right, that's going to allow them to be successful. Most of the students that drop out or don't finish, there's some sort of a mental health issue. It might be alcoholism, it might be drug addiction or gaming addiction. I know people get addicted to games, and so maybe before you start any kind of life journey, right, you got to take care of your own house, right, clean up your own act and make sure you got your own house in order in terms of addictions and things like that, but which are all mental health issues, really, is the way I see them anyway. And so if your mental health is strong, you'll be strong and successful in anything you do in life, including a PhD program.
So can you relay some of your experiences as a graduate student? How many hours did you invest studying as a graduate student during your PhD? And how did you balance your academic life and your social life?
Yeah. So you gotta test my memory now because it's been a while. But no, I had two little kids when I was in a PhD program, and my wife was we needed her working full time because she had the health insurance. I don't know if your audience knows, but in the U.S., health insurance is a big deal, right? To try to, and so we needed her to be working. So I was going to PhD program and taking care of two kids, and working. I was like teaching at a community college, trying to make extra money to feed the kids and so forth. I come from a poverty background in my life, but I'm white male. And in the U.S., that's a huge advantage. Right? And so it's easier for me to pull out of poverty than it would be somebody else. But I did have that poverty background, and so I was very, very busy. But my mental health was first priority. So I always take time for prayer, and I always take time for meditation. I hit my knees first thing in the morning in prayer, and I hit my knees every night in prayer. Sometimes I don't stay down very long, but in the morning I'll say please at least, right? And at the night I say thank you. And so that's, like I say, that's just part of me maintaining my mental health. in a way that allows me to be successful and allows me to, to handle a heavy workload,
I'm just being curious here about, you said you every day you wake up during your graduate studies, you you hit your nail on the ground to pray, to
Yes.
acknowledge God.
Yeah.
And you have also stated that you have studied all religion and you are fond of all of them.
Yeah.
I don't think you identify with any of them, right?
That's correct. I mean, technically I'm a Catholic, but I don't attend Mass. I don't follow their rules, so I don't think I belong.
I don't know if this concept exists. Maybe let me coin it. How do you maintain your religion sanity? Your religion sanity, despite having like respect and understanding of various or different religion. How do you maintain such sanity? Because I know so many persons, the more they study, the more confused they become.
Oh, yeah. No, I mean, the more I study, the more I see overlap, and, the common denominator, the one thing that all religions, if you get to the essence, right? So too much of religion that's why religion is maybe a bad word, because religion quickly you run into dogma, right? And you run into sort of like rules and regulations and things like that. And those are problematic. Those are man-made. Those aren't from God, I don't think. And so, what God expects of us, I think, is to just be of service and to love, right? And if you have a loving predisposition and a predisposition to serve, you can't go wrong. I'm a human, right? And so I can forget, really easy. I sort of a built-in forgetter, if you will. And so that's why I try to remind myself each day. Here lately, I don't know if the camera will pick it up, but I do this, like, and what that symbolizes me, I'm putting my God armor on. I put my God armor on as I go out to meet the day, and I try to do that each morning, and just go out and share the love.
Interesting. I must say this or commend you, even at your age now. I don't even know how old you are, but I know you are quite advanced
Right.
by age. You look energetic.
Yeah.
You look healthy. And most importantly, you always appear sharp. According to my father, he said you appear sharp. That means you appear very smart. Can you tell audience what you actually do on daily basis to maintain this your energy level and health?
Yeah. So I'm very cognizant of what I eat, and I try to eat healthy, and I also get exercise. I'm a step counter. I have where I count my steps, and I try to average over 12,000 steps every day. And so I do take regular exercise. I pay attention to what I'm eating. I don't drink. I don't drink alcohol. I don't use drugs of any kind. And I pray, and that seems to be enough.
And I remember you told us that you take inventory of whatever you take into your system. Every day you have an inventory where whatever you eat, you take note of it, a record of that.
Yeah, no, that's correct. I do log what I eat, the amount of water I drink, the number of hours I sleep. That might be a little bit of a mental health issue there, but that I'm a little bit too involved in trying to keep track of those things. But if that was my worst sin or whatever, that I being too cautious or something, I'll take that. I do like to pay attention to what I'm eating and how much I'm sleeping and so forth, and the quality of my sleep, and I make adjustments accordingly. I drink a lot of water. There's so much sodium in the food in America, right? Especially restaurant food, but if you drink a lot of water, that keeps that sodium level down. And so I'm 65. That's not real old, right? I'll be 66 in June. I don't take any medicines. I don't take any kind of blood pressure medicine or cholesterol medicine. A lot of Americans do. All my brothers and sisters, biological brothers and sisters, are taking these medicines. It's a big industry in the U.S., the pharmaceutical industry, and we have commercials all day long, right, trying to convince people to take more and more medicine. I try to watch what I eat, and then I get exercise, and then be mindful.
One thing that stood out for me from what you have been saying all this while, and it's quite silent, even though you have not mentioned it, which is your level of discipline? How do you maintain it?
You know, there's a lot of professors that are where I am in my career right now who sort of like take it easy, kind of coast or something like that, right? And don't keep going. But I don't know. It's just like, I know life is short, and I'm just trying to make use of the time I've given here. God willing, I'm going to publish more. I just want to make sure I'm, making use of the time I have here. My last book, I did try to work in a little bit of like what I would call my God consciousness, or my which is my true motivation and my true interest in life, just to serve God. And I got a little bit of it in my Congress book, which is hard to do, but I was able to work in. And so as I move forward now with the next book and stuff, I'm going to try more and more to change my message to reflect more like what you're allowing me to talk about today. I share a little bit of this in the classroom.
Yes.
You've been in but I don't go too far with it, right?
Yes.
And I'm going further with it right now than I would normally do, right?
True.
But I just feel like this is the right time to do it. Maybe, I don't know, I just feel moved to do it. And so there's no sense in pretending that I live some other life. This is the life I live. It's a life of very, very heavy discipline. I think that being prayerful, being mindful, those are parts of the discipline that I've used to be successful. I'm not at the top of my profession or anything close to that, but I do have considerable material sort of successes and so forth. But really, I see all of that as a function of my spiritual progress and my spiritual successes. It's being comfortable in my own skin, staying focused, and then these sort of earthly kind of accomplishments or whatever just seem to happen.
Okay. You have written quite a couple of books, very well recognized, especially here in the United States. How long does it take you to write a book, and what hours of investment do you give to a book? When you start a book project, do you make sure you write every day until you accomplish it, or how do you go about it?
Yeah, so I've got 7 books right now, one in 2023 and one in 2024. So pretty recent. The first one was in 2011, I think. There's a couple of ways to answer. Like, the book that came out in 2024, I've been thinking about it for 20 or 30 years. So
30 years?
Oh yeah, because it was related to my dissertation. In terms of discipline in writing, I do try to write every day. I do try to write, at least 4 or 5 days a week, consecutive. Sometimes take a couple of days off to refresh. This summer, for instance, I plan, God willing, to knock out another book. It's a topic that I've been thinking about for a long time. And I've had students working with me on it for a long time, for at least a couple of years. A lot of the stuff I've written up to this point, including the journal articles and so forth, have really helped try to define the problems that I see. I think I've got to talk more about the solutions. And so this next book is more about the solutions and just trying to test different solutions to see if there's any empirical evidence to support one particular solution more so than another. Just see where, the U.S. is in rough shape right now. But a lot of times there's, pain is a touchstone for spiritual growth, and so I'm not pessimistic. I'm not worried. I'm not despondent. I believe something good will come of it. And so I just want to stay focused on the solution, keep my own, all I can do is, keep my own attitude in order.
Now, you are highly accomplished. Even though you don't like using the word highly, you are quite economical when you talk about your accomplishments. But looking back at all you have achieved so far and what you are about to achieve, what do you think will be your biggest legacy in the
Helping students. Yeah, absolutely. When I see a student, get a job, finish up, and graduate, that's the biggest thrill in my life. I would hope my legacy is just that somebody that's given back, that's worked to serve students and to share the love.
I know you don't. I have never seen you talk about retirement, but it's something that is inevitable. How do you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I'm not going to stick around working and collecting a paycheck if I don't feel I'm contributing, right? You know, like some people get really old and they keep working because of ego or because, you know, and I want to guard against that. You know, I don't ever want to just keep working for the sake of my ego or something like that. But right now I feel strong and I feel healthy and I feel, you know, I got something to contribute. I think I'm earning my salary, you know, and so as long as I continue to earn my salary and promote the university, promote our students, I'm going to probably just keep working. I don't really have a date or time yet, but I think I'll know when it's time.
Okay. So, but when does retirement eventually knock on your door? Do you plan on doing something differently, or you go and relax?
I thank you for letting me talk about my true motivations in life and my true self, which is instead of my earthly self, you know, and so that person and that avocation, you know, I don't know if the word is not your occupation, but your avocation, the thing that you're most interested in. That will, you know, I will continue to promote that, you know, and promote mindfulness as long as I live, you know, and as long as I'm here, that'll be my job, you know, trying to promote consciousness. I really believe we're two things, right? We have this earthly experience, right? And then there's the true self, right? You know, ever heard someone say, well, I got to get out of my head. Well, if I got to get out of my head, I must be two things, right? And so I think my job in this life is to bring my true self and let it out and let it dominate this earthly experience. And I want to encourage anyone and everyone I come across to do the same because of the great peace that it entails.
Wow. Let's talk about the most important person in your life as I've observed. And without a guess, that's your wife. Because every time you talk about your accomplishment, you highly acknowledge her contribution to that.
Right.
And one thing I've noticed here in America is that the institution of marriage is quite under a threat. There is a high rate of divorce process.
Right. 50-50 chance just about.
And you have been married for a very long while.
So
she obviously your love of your life. But she's a woman, you're also a human. How have you been able to maintain this, your marriage?
So I was married in 9/9/89, September 9th of 1989.
1989?
Yeah, it was when we got married. And I was already 30 years old or so. I was born in 59. She was 24. We've been together ever since, and marriage is as strong as it's ever been. We're as tight as we've ever been. We were just crazy in love. I've been talking a lot about prayer, but you know, I started off praying on my knees, many years ago, like I say, probably before I was married. And my wife would see me pray on my knees for many years. And then around, I think it was 2006, so this is about, 19 years ago or something like that. I looked up from the bed and I looked across the bed and she was on her knees. And so each night now, she's still not a morning prayer, but every night we on the opposite sides of the bed, we both hit our knees, and that's a big part of it. I think we share a faith, you know, not in a particular religious dogma or something, but we share a real faith that there is something bigger than us, you know, and that our job is to honor it and to stay in line with it and to serve it, and which, you know, if you're thinking of one word, if I had to try to one word that sums it up, it's love. You know, love. My higher power, my God, right, represents love, and so I try to practice that.
So if you are given like a second opportunity, how do you mean that you're having a second opportunity? You know, I know so many people are not happy in marriage; they are enduring.
Right.
But would you remarry your wife?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. No. It's been a perfect marriage. I mean, you know, even if there been a problem here or there, we worked through it, and it would it made us stronger. We've learned from our mistakes. When our kids were young, when they were very little, we just got 2 girls, but when they were very little, we had disagreements about how to raise them and stuff like that. And we'd raise our voices in front of them sometimes. And so I'm really sad that happened. But we both recognized the folly, the mistake that was, and we've tried to make amends to both girls, and apologize and try to.
Do you apologize to your children?
Oh, most certainly, yeah. If I feel I've made a mistake, I have to.
This is not common with African parents, so I'm surprised and shocked.
Yeah. No, I mean, I remember one time it was doing research in the office, and it was late at night, and the light was coming out from under the door, and my youngest daughter, she probably was maybe 4 years old or something at the time. In the middle of the night, I'm working, and she knocks, and I said, "Oh, what do you want? Go to bed," And I've since tried to apologize to her, and that's not good parenting, right? And she might have been scared or whatever it was, and so I've got regrets in that regard. But it's in the past, right? In the past, the mistakes of the past don't haunt me today, because I use them, right, to grow and change, and to I would never do that if I'm blessed someday to have a grandchild or something. I don't yet. I certainly would have learned from those mistakes and not repeat them.
Okay, I want to give you 30 seconds to send a shout out to your wife.
Okay. Yeah. Hello, sweetheart, and she knows everything that I could say. That she knows how crazy in love I am with her.
You have to look at the camera. You're looking at Tara.
Okay. Yeah. I love you, Lucy. Okay. And Hillary and Autumn. That's the 2 girls' names. Yeah.
I know some of them one of them is pushing her PhD somewhere.
Yes.
And your dad have been saying a very good thing about you. He has been saying a lot of good things about you. And I look forward to meeting you someday.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Okay, what advice do you have for young scholars who are actually planning to get married? Do you think it's worth doing?
Oh, I'm a big fan of marriage. I'm a big fan of monogamy. I think we're supposed to. We're monogamous animals. We're like the swan or whatever. We marry once for life or whatever. And if people are getting divorced, it's sad, but I think there's mental health issues that are causing that. Like if we're focused and stayed centered, right, then I think marriages will stay together. It doesn't. It's not necessarily both parties are insane. Only one party might be insane. If there's mental health problems on either one or both or whatever, that's probably what's creating. Because naturally, I think we're intended to be monogamous.
Yeah.
I think that's the natural inclination for the human animal.
I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you very much for honoring my invitation. Yeah. I know so many people, especially some scholars from Africa, would want to know if you are willing to connect with them through research partnership.
I'm willing to do anything and everything I can to be of service to others. I got limited amounts of time, and because I got to take care of my own mental health. Yeah. But if and when it happens, the answer is always yes.
Okay. Thank you for honoring my invitation. Once again, you're welcome.
Okay.